Welcome to Tears of Karma. I remember the way my heels clicked against the polished floor as I entered the reception hall. My heart was swelling, full of pride and trembling nerves, expecting to see a table overflowing with blessings, each gift a symbol of love and support for my daughter's new beginning. I had dreamed of this moment, imagined the silver bows, the shining envelopes, the kind notes tucked beneath ribbons. Instead, what greeted me was an expanse of white linen stretched across an empty table, bare and humiliating, like a stage set for mockery. The whispers started almost instantly, soft, poisonous breaths darting between guests like arrows. No gifts. I caught a woman murmur, her eyes sliding toward me with pity so sharp it burned. My daughter stood in her lace gown, smiling bravely, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the collapse of expectation, the tiny fracture in her joy. It struck me deeper than any insult could. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the humiliation pressing in from all sides. Yet before I could move, a manicured hand reached toward me. The groom's mother, Marianne, elegant in her shimmering gown, extended an envelope. Heavy, deliberate, wrapped in silence that demanded attention. I felt its weight before I even touched it. For a fleeting second, I prayed it was kindness, that she had chosen subtlety over spectacle. But when my fingers closed around the stiff paper, a chill slid through me. Her smile was too sharp, her eyes too triumphant. This wasn't a gift. It was something else, something darker. I slipped the envelope into my clutch, my heart hammering, already knowing, without opening it, that what lay inside was not generosity but poison. And as I held it, I felt the first spark of war ignite. I slipped away from the crowd, my pulse still trembling from the whispers, and found a corner near the coat room where no one would follow. My hands shook as I slid a nail beneath the flap, the thick paper tearing with a hiss that felt louder than it should have. Inside was no check, no blessing, not even the polite card most guests offer. It was a letter, 4 sentences carved in ink like commandments. My stomach churned as I read. Your daughter should remember how lucky she is to marry into our family. She must understand her place. A wife serves. A wife submits. That is her gift in return. The words blurred, but the venom was sharp enough to cut through tears. Marianne's handwriting was elegant, curling like lace, each stroke deliberate, cruelly graceful. She hadn't just denied my daughter kindness. She had chosen humiliation as her present. I looked back through the doorway, to where my daughter twirled in her gown, her fragile smile stretched like porcelain under the weight of curious eyes. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to storm across the hall and slap the smug grin off Marianne's face. But I didn't. I couldn't, because she wanted a scene. She wanted me to snap, to confirm every poisonous word she'd written. Instead, I folded the letter slowly, sliding it back into the envelope as if returning a weapon to its sheath. My chest burned, but my face was calm, blank. No one would see my rage, not yet. I watched Marianne raise her glass, eyes glinting as though she knew I had read her curse. And as the music swelled and the guests clapped for the new couple, I swore that this moment, this letter, would never be forgiven. Her name was Marianne, and she wore her cruelty like pearls around her neck, shiny, ostentatious, impossible to ignore. From the moment she swept into the reception hall, she behaved as if the entire celebration existed solely to showcase her dominance. Her gown shimmered beneath the lights, her hair sculpted to perfection, every detail chosen to remind us that wealth could purchase beauty, influence, and fear. I watched her glide from table to table, touching shoulders, leaning close, whispering in ears. The laughter that followed wasn't genuine. It was sharp, rehearsed, as though the guests had learned long ago that Marianne's approval was both currency and curse. She caught my eye once across the room, her smile precise, her gaze deliberate. I knew then that she wanted me to feel small, as though my daughter's wedding was her stage, and I was merely an uninvited spectator. Her son, the groom, was tethered to her by invisible strings. When she gestured, he obeyed. When she leaned in, he nodded. I saw her fingers rest possessively on his sleeve during the photographs, her whispers bending his posture like a tree in the wind. My daughter clung to his arm, radiant yet fragile, not realizing she was being claimed by a woman who had no intention of letting go. I recognized the type. I had encountered women like her before. Women who measured their worth by how effectively they could diminish others. But never had one dared to make a spectacle of me, of my blood, on a day meant for joy. As the evening deepened, Marianne raised her glass in a silent toast to herself, her eyes meeting mine with a glint of triumph. It was not a celebration. It was a warning. And warnings, I decided, are meant to be answered. What broke me more than Marianne's malice was my son-in-law's silence. He stood beside my daughter, hand in hand, smiling for the cameras as though nothing had happened. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight, but his lips never moved in her defense. Not once did he flinch at his mother's cruelty. He simply stood there, a groom sculpted from stone, while the woman he vowed to protect was quietly stripped of dignity. Around him, his brothers smirked, their eyes glinting with the same arrogance that dripped from Marianne's every word. His sisters turned away, pretending not to notice the humiliation spreading through the room. They had all been raised in her shadow, trained to survive by silence, but to see him, my daughter's husband, join their ranks was a wound deeper than any insult could cut. I caught my daughter's face in the glow of the candles. Her tears did not fall, but they glimmered there, bright and unshed, burning hotter than the flames that flickered on the towering cake. She forced her lips into a smile, a desperate mask, but her eyes betrayed her. She was breaking, and he did nothing. The vows he had spoken only hours before, honor, cherish, protect, already lay in ruins at her feet. His silence was not weakness, it was choice. He had chosen his mother's approval over his wife's dignity. That betrayal was the sharpest knife, and I knew it would cost him dearly. As Marianne lifted her glass and the room erupted in hollow applause, I felt something shift inside me. My grief hardened into steel, my humiliation into purpose. And in that moment, I understood. Silence was not protection. Silence was complicity, and I would make him pay for it. Humiliation can hollow you out, but it can also fill you with fire. That night, after the guests had gone and the hall lay scattered with wilting flowers and abandoned glasses, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the letter Marianne had given me. Every line, every curling stroke of ink replayed in my mind alongside the smirks of her sons and the vacant silence of my son-in-law. Their laughter echoed long after the music had faded, searing itself into me. I should have crumbled. I should have drowned in shame, but instead something sharper took root. Revenge stopped being a fantasy. It became survival. If I allowed Marianne to define my daughter's future, then I was complicit in her suffering. That I could never accept. So I began to watch. At family gatherings, I listened carefully, nodding at Marianne's endless boasts about her husband's company, about their investments, about the grand summer house she claimed was paid in full. I smiled when she bragged about her eldest son's sharp business instincts, while quietly noting the tremor in his voice whenever money was mentioned. I collected details the way others collect heirlooms. Dates, names, debts hinted at in drunken slips. A rumor from a neighbor about late-night arguments. The small cracks they tried to plaster over with champagne and diamonds. Each piece I stored like a weapon, invisible but sharp, waiting for the right moment to draw blood. Marianne thought she had silenced me, that her letter had bound me in humiliation. But she had only awakened something far stronger. I would not fight her with screams or scenes. I would fight her with patience. And one day soon, those seeds would bloom into her ruin. It didn't take long to find them. Marianne's family wrapped themselves in silk and crystal, but beneath the shimmer lay rot. Their fortune was not a fortress. It was a crumbling wall propped up by appearances. I learned this not through grand revelations, but through whispers, stray comments, and the trembling desperation they tried to disguise as arrogance. Her eldest son, the one she paraded as her golden child, spent nights hunched over cards and dice. His debts were whispered in hushed tones at the club, debts he covered with loans he had no means to repay. His wife's smile was brittle, painted over the fractures of a household on the edge. Her husband's company, the empire she boasted of at every gathering, was bleeding. Contracts had slipped through their fingers, deals promised but never fulfilled. I overheard one executive call it a sinking ship dressed in chandeliers. The phrase lingered with me. And Marianne herself, her perfection was a mask. I saw the tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking, the way her eyes darted when someone mentioned audits, the brittle way she laughed when gossip veered too close. Even her pearls seemed heavier, as though they weighed down the very neck that wore them. I realized then that I didn't need to invent their destruction. It was already written in their own sins. Greed, pride, deceit. All I had to do was give fate the smallest push, and everything she had built would topple. Karma was already circling, patient and inevitable. and I promised myself I would be the one to guide it straight to her door. I started small. Revenge is not a hammer. It is a whisper that grows into thunder. One careful word to the right banker about overdue debts. A quiet tip slipped to a journalist about contracts hanging by threads. I never used my name. I never left fingerprints. I simply planted seeds in soil already cracked, and I let suspicion do the watering. Marian never saw me. She kept herself busy, circling my daughter like a hawk, picking at her with subtle barbs disguised as advice. A wife should learn silence. A wife must know her place. My daughter endured it with clenched teeth, unaware that while Marianne tightened her grip, the ground beneath her family's empire was already trembling. The first story broke in the local paper, just a small piece about irregularities in her husband's company. She waved it off at brunch, laughing too loudly, but I saw the panic glimmer behind her eyes. Then the rumors about her eldest son began to spread, whispers of gambling debts carried from club to club, growing louder with each retelling. I stood in silence, unseen, watching. I never had to push too hard. Once suspicion finds a crack, it widens on its own, splitting reputations open like rotten fruit. Marian thought she was untouchable, but fire does not warn before it spreads. And as I watched the first sparks catch, I felt no guilt, only the intoxicating calm of knowing the blaze was mine to control. The family who once sneered at mine began to stumble. Their invitations, once gilded and endless, grew scarce until they vanished altogether. The same neighbors who once clamored for their attention now crossed the street to avoid them. Creditors arrived in sleek cars, leaving envelopes stamped with urgency. Each visit chipped away at their illusion of superiority. The groom, my daughter's husband, wore his bitterness like armor. He drank too much, snapped too quickly, and flung his frustrations at her in cruel bursts. She told me once, her voice low and trembling, that he had called her the reason everything was falling apart, as if she had conjured the debts, as if she had whispered the rumors herself. Marian tried to hold the family together with pearls and poise, but the pearls strangled her, and the poise cracked. At dinners, her laugh rang too sharp, her voice too shrill, her hand gripping her wine glass as though it could steady the empire crumbling beneath her. I saw it in her eyes, desperation blooming where arrogance once lived. And my daughter saw it too. Where she had once been fragile, she grew stronger. She stood taller, answered Marianne's barbs with silence that cut deeper than any words. I watched her transform, the chains slipping away link by link. The mask Marianne had polished for years was slipping, sliding from her face with every whisper she could not control, every debt she could not deny. And when the mask finally shattered, it wasn't the family's ruin I saw reflected in her broken smile. It was the beginning of her own. When the truth of their bankruptcy hit, it struck like a storm tearing through a rotted house. Overnight, the grand facades that had once seemed untouchable collapsed into rubble. The cars were repossessed, the summer home listed quietly for sale, the jewels pawned behind closed doors. Marianne's family, desperate and flailing, looked for something, someone, to sacrifice. And they chose my daughter. They whispered to her that she should leave, that she had brought bad luck, that discarding her would somehow preserve what little remained of their name. They thought she would beg, that she would crawl, that she would clutch at their ankles as they shoved her aside. But she didn't. Instead, she stood straighter than I had ever seen her. She looked her husband in the eye, and when he failed to speak, just as he had failed at the wedding, failed at every moment that demanded courage, she turned away. She left not as a woman abandoned, but as a survivor. She carried no shame in her stride, only the quiet triumph of someone who had endured cruelty and come out stronger. When she returned to me, her face was pale but her eyes were fierce. She was not broken, she was free. Free from Marianne's poison, free from the silence that had once held her captive. And I, who had lit the fire in secret, watched the flames consume everything that family had tried to use against her. They had thought to ruin her. Instead, they revealed their own ruin. And as I held her in my arms that night, I understood that this, her freedom, her survival, was the only wedding gift that truly mattered. The rest had only been wrapping paper, already set aflame. In the end, Marianne stood alone. The pearls she once wore so proudly had vanished, sold piece by piece to keep the wolves from clawing at her door. The grand house that had been her stage, her throne, sat hollow now. Curtains stripped, chandeliers unlit, the echo of emptiness louder than any applause she once commanded. No wealth, no husband, No empire. Only Marianne, left with nothing but her name, and even that had rotted, its sweetness long since soured on the town's tongue. Her children scattered like ashes in the wind. The sons who once laughed at my daughter's tears abandoned her when their own debts came knocking. The daughters, who had learned cruelty at her knee, fled when their mother's name became poison to their ambitions. Her husband shrank into silence, defeated, unwilling to shoulder the ruin he had allowed her to orchestrate. She, who once stood above all of us, was left to choke on the smoke of her own downfall. And me, I did not raise my voice. I did not claw or scream. I did not dirty my hands. I merely pulled back the veil, exposed the cracks, and let the truth breathe. Marianne had built her empire on lies and fear, and when truth entered, it spread like fire through dry timber. I whispered in the right ears. I tipped the balance where it already leaned, but I never forced the fall. I only guided it. Karma did the rest. There are nights when I sit alone and think of that first humiliation. The empty gift table, glowing under chandeliers that mocked my daughter's fragile smile. I remember the heat in my chest, the sting of whispered pity, the way Marianne pressed that cursed envelope into my hand as though sealing a fate she thought was mine. For a long time, I believed that moment was the beginning of our ruin. But I see it differently now. It was not the end of us. It was the beginning of her. That empty table was not a wound. It was a spark. Survival, I learned, is not silence. Silence is surrender, and I never surrendered. I endured. I watched. I remembered. And when the time came, I returned her cruelty to her, wrapped in patience and fire. Marianne's laughter still echoes in my memory, but it does not haunt me anymore. It feeds me, because I know how it ended. Her laughter turned to silence, her arrogance to begging, her empire to dust. I confess all of this now, not for pity, but for satisfaction. Justice tastes sweeter when it ripens slowly. Marianne tried to humiliate me, tried to break my daughter's spirit, tried to make us small. But in her arrogance, she revealed her own weakness, and it destroyed her. Every tear my daughter shed, every sleepless night I endured, was returned to Marianne tenfold. Her downfall was not a sudden collapse. It was slow, grinding, humiliating, the same way she had planned mine. That symmetry is what soothes me, what lets me sleep at night without bitterness clinging to my heart. She thought she was writing my tragedy, but she scripted her own. And when I look back now, I realize this. Marianne's ruin was the only wedding gift my daughter ever truly needed. Not wrapped in bows, not sealed in an envelope, but delivered by karma itself. It is a gift that will never tarnish. A gift that will never be forgotten.